If you are viewing on our YouTube channel, please visit this episode on our website, yogaengineer.com, to access links for educational resources and ways that you can support this growing movement. Hi, Elena.
Hello,
How are you today?
I am so low energy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What about you?
About the same. It's been a really long, psycho-emotionally draining week. Um, as a side note, and because I'm like, oh, look at us. We're both at like totally different angles on our video today. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, that's cute. Now
we
I just need some like candles in the background.
All right. Well, lightening the mood out the gate. I'm Richelle Ricard, and this is my friend Elena Chung, and we are the Yoga Engineers coming to you from Washington and Oregon, respectively, from our own homes. And we are um, in the midst, let's see, what's the actual date today? June 8th, 2020. So in real time, the last 2 weeks have been nationwide, worldwide, actually a real emotional challenge. Like outside of the pandemic, a man, George Floyd, was killed in Minneapolis by police officers, and his death um, at the hands on video of these police officers became the catalyst for a social uprising, really, nationwide and then worldwide, against not just the death of this man, but the death of all of the Black people at the hands of police officers over the last couple years in specific, but also bringing to the forefront the conversation about the systemic racism that exists in American culture, always hasn't changed, no matter what movements in civil rights history have come forward. Systemically, so many things just have not changed, and so I know I speak for Elena when I say this has been a deeply affecting week and 2 weeks, and we both have had our personal time to experience and grieve and feel, and we haven't talked too much to each other off camera actually about our own personal experience of it.
Mhm.
We talked about some other historical things of relevance, but so today's conversation is going to be much more real time and address kind of what we're feeling and try to reflect that through the practice of yoga and back on the culture of yoga in the United States. And we'll just see where it goes. So, Elena, I love
Mhm.
you. Thank you for
Love
being
you.
here when I know both of us still don't feel like our normal, like, ha ha ha, ha chipper, like, let's banter selves. So thanks for being here. I think it's an important conversation to
Yeah.
continue to have. So
Mhm.
take it away.
Oh, should I talk about my feelings?
Yeah. Now we start the therapeutic portion of our show.
Yeah.
Elena, how are you feeling really?
Hmm. Extremely conflicted.
Mm.
Um, Certainly angry, confused, sad, sometimes helpless, sometimes not. uh, I think one of the things that has been really important for me to understand for myself is what role Asians and Asian Americans like play in the context of this whole thing.
Mhm.
Because I think there's a lot of reasons for this, but I feel like it's a part of Asian culture to not really like talk back to authority or to sweep things under the rug, or to look at something and think like, this is not my fight, so I'm not going to do anything about it. And of course I like completely disagree with that in practice, and I am like in the camp of thinking like we do need to stand with our Black brothers and sisters, and we wouldn't be here if they did not pass like the Immigration Rights Act, right? Like, it's interesting to me because of like the whole model minority myth, which is like, oh, if you work hard like Asians do, you could be successful, you could be happy. Like, why are you not doing this, right? Like speaking to other minorities in the U.S. and not that Asians came up with it, but rather like it's an unspoken but pervasive thought pattern like from white history, right? So I think something that really bothers me about that is that it's such an obvious way to divide people of color, right? To like put us against one another in a way that makes both of us like, or makes multiple like people of color just like disempowered, I guess. Is that a word? Disempowered? Unempowered?
Yep. Disempowered. Yep.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't roll off the tongue because it's like such a like, oh, kind of word, but it's real.
Yeah.
And it's not only a real word, but it is a real act for sure.
Definitely. And so for me, it's like, even though I'm doing a lot of processing around this, I also recognize, this is kind of interesting. I like thought about making like a little Facebook post or an Instagram post about that, because I wasn't seeing very much, I guess like content from that perspective. Like everything that I've been seeing posted is like from my white friends being like, here's what white people can do. And like, I think it's completely true that, especially for me, being an Asian American woman who is lighter skinned, I certainly have more privilege than people with darker skin than I do. And I recognize that. However, I'm not like as privileged as a white person. If you were to give it such a like linear scale, I guess. And so I was worried, like, if I wrote this post, like, would it sound like I was taking this thing and making it about me, which is something that I don't want to do, because like that's the problem, right? Is like taking the movement and making it about. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of people be like, this is the way that I've been dealing with it. It just reminds me of all of my experiences, and it's like very well-meaning like white ladies. So, and I'm not saying that we don't get to like. I think it's completely within our right as just like humans who, when we experience something like such a large shift or awakening in consciousness, to use that to understand our own relationship with whatever topic at hand. But I don't like the idea of like adding to the noise or like taking up more space. But I do think it's something that's really important, right? Is like acknowledging our role as Asian Americans, because we are coming from like a different playing field than like whites or blacks. So that's how I feel. Confused. A lot of feelings. Confused makes it sound like I'm like, I don't get it, but it's not that I don't get it. I just think there's a lot of things to get and a lot of things to like wrap my own head around, and to think about like times when I have done things that are racially insensitive, and all the times that I've had like just like subtly or overt like racist comments directed at me. I don't know. It certainly invites a lot of self-reflection.
It does. And I think that self-reflection is such an integral first step in this conversation, regardless of who the people are having the conversation. That I'll quote someone else here. We were talking earlier about an incident that occurred at the Northwest Yoga Conference a few years ago. And I was reading a response letter to it, and we'll get into more detail about it later, but this quote was just so spot on to the greater question of examining our history through something other than the like white privilege lens, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'll just quote it. Accountability is the first crucial step in resolution. respect breeds more respect, and unrepentant disrespect breeds more disrespect. And I think that that in so many ways is at the heart of all of the different rabbit holes that we can go down in this conversation, right? Because I think confusion is the most apropos way to describe what most of us are feeling. Those of us who are not Black people, especially, that one way or another, outside of our own, like we have to do that self-introspection. We have to be able to look into the mirror and understand not only the words we say and the reactions we have and the microaggressions and the implied biases, right, that we feel as a socially ingrained, like, statistical horror show, right? Like,
That is what it is.
that's what it is like the reality that it is so ingrained in us that Black people are different, and that at a nervous system level, regardless of our intellect, right, we're still having like nervous system reactions to people who are different than ourselves, and not using biology as an excuse, right, but moving beyond that and saying, okay, but I am an intellectual person who can recognize this human being and the oppression that they have suffered under our systemic unwillingness to acknowledge bias.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't acknowledge that as an individual, we will never be able to acknowledge it as a system or a society. And so the confusion of emotion around that, I think, is a given, because the confusion about what to do about it is like, it's a very complex system to unwind and rebuild, which is what we're gonna have to do. It was just announced actually that the Minneapolis City Council has decided to completely disband the entire police department and build it over from the ground up. They have acknowledged fully that incremental change has not been effective on any level, and that we can't continue trying to chip away at something. We literally have to wipe the slate clean and come back at it from a completely different standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that even though policing is the catalyst for this conversation, when it comes to the yoga perspective, it's I think the only place that I feel capable of making actual statements, because I'm a privileged white woman and I can have compassion for, and I can relate to people on a human level, but I can never ever be actually in the shoes of any person of color and their perception of how the world perceives them. So the thing I can do is direct my energy right now. I don't think it's enough, but hopefully it's a step towards something, to figure out what yoga and the practice of yoga can offer into this conversation. Does that seem relevant or reasonable at this stage? Like, I acknowledge it's definitely not enough. There are way bigger, like, practical things that could be addressed here, but this is the tool I have right now. And so I'm trying to figure out how to use it to best effect. Does that seem reasonable on any level? Like, what does that bring up for you?
I think that's totally reasonable. And I think you're right that there are general things that we could all be doing, right? Like the way that we vote, the way that we contact like our policymakers, or like interact with like legislation, like the hard conversations that we have in our day-to-day lives, like donating, signing petitions, like going to protests, all of those things and more, are like the things that hopefully we will all engage in into some capacity. But I also think that like I think that maybe this is like a subset of that idea of like having the hard conversations, or like bringing it into the rest of your life, right? Because I think something to remember with all this stuff is that it isn't just like for 2 weeks you just make posts on social media and then you go back to what you were doing before, right? Like it's meant to be an ongoing conversation. So to me, it makes sense that as yoga teachers, like we see or try to figure out how we can navigate being like good yoga teachers and like taking in these life lessons and these perspective shifts and like bringing that into the yoga room. I think that makes a lot of sense, because yoga is such an inherently introspective practice, right? And it's like it's such a privilege to be able to engage with your own self-work in such a meaningful way. But the next step is like the way that you take it out into the rest of the world, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I'm going to quote this letter again, and I will post in the online links to this podcast. I'll post the link to this letter as well, so people can put it in better context. But such relevant questions. Are we as a yoga community being honest about our own biases? Can we listen to other perspectives in order to widen our own? What voice within us is trustworthy and honest? And do we listen to truth when it speaks, or do we suppress it? I think these are really can be applied so generally to the community beyond yoga, right? That these questions just apply to us as humans in society right now. But that said, if we are truly listening to what people need, I think it's important that we acknowledge as yoga teachers, as studio owners, as people in the profession of yoga, that in the West, yoga is a privileged practice. Like access to yoga education is limited by location, by finances, by schedule availability, by internet access even. And I think that the coronavirus pandemic and quarantine has showed really the weak points nationwide of like how even just something like internet access divides us, right? Not having that universally available to people at reasonable rates limits accessibility to information, including sometimes the yoga practice. And so, we've talked in previous episodes about how no, having a teacher is like one-on-one who can talk to you and move you through movements and adjustments and modifications personal to you. That is a very different experience than watching a yoga video, right, in your own home. And so
Absolutely.
If we can acknowledge that that is a difference, then we have to also acknowledge that the people who have access to us as teachers is limited by socioeconomic factors, by racial divisions, by neighborhood accessibility, by these things that that just turning yoga into a capitalistic venture automatically compartmentalizes, right? And so how do we, what do we do about that? How do we address that? A friend and colleague of mine from Seattle opened a yoga studio in Rainier Beach, which is a traditionally African-American area of Seattle. And she is a white woman. She's also a psychologist, and she works one-on-one with mental health aspects, and had that practice for a long time in addition to being a yoga teacher. She created a class for people of color, and created it as a safe space, right? A safe space so that people who normally feel really uncomfortable walking into a majority white yoga studio could have a place where they could come and practice feeling like they were surrounded by people they were familiar with, who had an experience that was similar to theirs, who it felt safer to them than being judged constantly by the people around them, right?
Totally.
And quite literally, a, a sportscaster, newscaster, radio personality got wind of this class through some viewer info dropped in his inbox, and he essentially took her to task, called on the state attorney general to hold her accountable for it being racist to exclude white people from a yoga class on the basis of their skin color, right? It turned into a wild, like, she started getting death threats like on social media, and this was 2015. This is not a time where the white male sportscaster guy was going to have to apologize for calling it out. If anything, she actually had to, in the end, turn around and apologize for excluding white people from the class. And then the class disappeared because she couldn't maintain like a life where death threats were part of her every day. So it's like, okay, fast forward 5 years, and now we're having these conversations in a grander scope, right? About white privilege, being outed, how we can address our whiteness, how we can like understand and not just rewrite history, not just like say, oh, okay, it'd be better if we looked at it this way because that's convenient. And are having to write a new future that acknowledges the failings of white culture in the context of everything. So as yoga studios, now re-asking these questions, I know I'm rambling, sorry. It's interesting to me how we're gonna go about shifting any of that power, frankly. Yeah. My studio owner, the last studio that I've been teaching at, she just emailed us and says, even though phase 1 is coming and studios will be able to open, I just don't know if we're ready. We have to put some things in place. And now, like, we really want to address this thing directly, which is awesome. But I just, like, what do you do with that? When, at least in Portland, I can speak to the fact that, frankly, one of the areas where the most yoga studios have popped up in concentration, in a newly gentrified area that is totally like infamous for displacing Black families over the last 30 years. And so it's like,
right.
How do you invite these people into this world and this practice when you're like, the building you're in is literally standing on land that they used to live on and can't afford to be even within a mile of anymore. It's like, oh God, this is just a woo big conversation to have.
Totally. And I think I have no answers for this, but I think a huge part of it is like figuring out how to move forward while addressing something like this in a way that isn't just pandering or isn't just trying to put on an image of like, we're so inclusive, but like secretly everything is still the same.
Totally.
I feel like there's a lot of, I was gonna say, I don't know if this applies to the yoga world, and I'm like, no, it definitely does. There's a lot of really just like well-meaning white people who want to, they're, they try their best. It's like, I know that sounds really like, I don't know, like demeaning or like condescending, but I don't mean it that way. I just think that it's much more complicated. I think now people are recognizing how complicated it is. I don't know why. I'm like sad that and angry that it took so long for it to be this big of a conversation, right? Like it took, I definitely think that one of the reasons that like, um, everything like kind of just like swelled at this moment is because of like quarantine. I think that's certainly a part of the dynamic, at least in the way that like our, maybe like how our attitudes are, or just the general,
For sure.
I don't know. This is like hard to say because I'm not saying like we're only reactive because we're in quarantine, because that's not what I think. I definitely.
No, but I think it's a circumstance in which more people have found themselves at the brink
Definitely.
psychologically and emotionally. And when one more, like the pile of kindling, I heard a guy on ABC last week who was brilliant. I wish I knew his name off the top of my head. He's like, this is not an isolated incident. The kindling has been stacked and stacking and stacking, and we'd every once in a while we'd have a little flare up. In different cities around the nation, a riot would happen. Not even a riot, a protest, and then the protest would get out of hand, either because somebody infiltrated it to make it look like they were violent, or the police on their own just decided that dispersing this peaceful protest was more important than allowing them their voice and starting the violence themselves. So this has been these tiny, like in terms of a war, like these tiny skirmishes that had no actual bearing on the end result, but just enough to release some pressure, and then we could kind of go back to what our normal was, and they were isolated enough that not all of us had to pay close attention, and only
Right.
the local people really had to deal with it at the time. And this, I think you're right, quarantine just had so many people in a position where there's nothing left to lose, and there's nothing else to protect. We finally hit the fucking bottom, and we have come to a place, not just the Black citizens of this nation, not just the other people of color, but those white Americans who also have felt powerless against the system, right?
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's like I can say that I am, yes, 100% a very privileged white woman, and that doesn't mean that I haven't had to work hard. It just means that my work maybe got me things that amount of work would not have gotten somebody else without my skin color. And I will openly acknowledge that. And yet I'm not high enough up even the white hierarchy to feel like my voice has any power over the system, right?
Totally.
And
Yeah.
and so that sense of confusion and that sense of lack of empowerment, to make a difference beyond having conversations with my very staunchly other family. Let's just say that for now.
Oh.
Like,
Hmm.
um, having having those conversations is about all I felt like I had in me, and now part of my feeling over the last 2 weeks is I'm watching the protests, and I'm feeling like I should be there. I should be in it. And my partner and I have been talking about it, and he said something that I think is also very relevant. He's like, if I was in there right now in the street, I'm bald, I'm white, I'm ripped. He's like, I'm the guy that people will potentially look at as an infiltrator and and not believe that I am sincere in my support. I also would be the person who'd have a really hard time not acting on the like the outrageous, right? If I'm sitting there protesting and I see somebody who starts breaking things or looting things, I'm going to address that and then probably be assumed that I'm not actually in the cause, that I'm an infiltrator or whatever, right? And so
Mhm.
that white male skepticism of being believed that I'm really a part of this and I believe in it, that was a profound like eye-opening moment for me, and just being like, oh fuck, like the way that we hold ourselves back with even our perceptions of ourselves and the questions that we have about being relevant allies to the community or the cause, like that continues to hold us back from taking action, right, and from being something other than a talking head. And that's part of what I've been struggling with, is like
Mm.
how to actually take decisive action without necessarily being in the center of the crowd. Like, is there a way, or am I deluding myself?
Mm.
I don't know, which is part of why I'm like, well, how can we make yoga work?
I see.
Does that make sense? Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, if I'm not doing that, and now the protests are like winding into something much smaller and more quiet and not as like, who knows how this is going to go. But I'm like, okay, how, at a certain point, the protests will be done and we will have to actually take real life, real time action. And so that's where I'm starting to try to look. Um, and fuck, I don't have any answers, which is part of why I'm like, Elena, can we talk about this? I feel like we have something. I just don't know what it is exactly, to
Mm.
offer. Um,
Okay, I have a couple thoughts.
yes, please.
So my first one is like this feeling of like I don't know if I should go to the protest because I like the issue of feeling like maybe I won't be believed, or like
Mm-hmm.
maybe I will be perceived to be a certain way that I'm not. Like when I hear that, I think welcome to what it feels like to be a person of color all the time.
Totally,
like
totally.
like I'm not saying this to this specific person in particular, but like when I have heard that thought process, I'm like, oh boohoo, like what, you can't handle like a few hours of being uncomfortable? Like what,
Totally.
people who like can't leave the house without maybe getting shot, like, you know
Yep.
what I mean? It's like,
Yep.
and so it's I think admittedly it's very hard for me to like hear that thought process and like have any sympathy for it. Like I
Totally.
actually don't think there's a problem with not I don't think there's a problem with not going to the protest. I don't think, let me see if I can rephrase that also. Like not going to the protest does not equate in my mind to like not supporting the cause. Because like we already said, there's lots of different ways you can do things
Mm-hmm.
to like show your support in a way that's meaningful besides protesting. But I don't find that reason for not going to be like, it's a shitty reason.
I
Like,
agree. I agree.
it's just like straight up shitty.
Totally.
Not a judgment on whether or not you go, but like that's a
Yeah.
bad reason.
No,
You know?
it is. And I would say that it's like the underlying reason is like, I'm going to end up arrested because I'm going to beat the shit out of some asshole who isn't like in it, right? Is really like, but I'm like reflecting on it. I'm like, no, there's like this whole like, how am I going to be perceived? And will it like, what is the danger of these scenarios, right? And like logicking it out instead of just like going with the gut that says, no, be an ally. Just show up. And I agree with you. I agree with you. I totally own the shittiness of that. And so it was like 2 days ago that I was like, I fucked up. Like I allowed those feelings and those thoughts to sway me in a way that kept me from doing the thing that I really ought to have done. And I don't want to continue to have those reactions. You know,
Mhm.
I want to, um, I, I want to be better. And, and again, this is kind of me being like, well, here's my experience. And like, which is
Yeah.
exactly what you were talking about in the beginning. And I don't want it to be about that, but it's also a process. That is the reality for those of us waking up to, like, you know, the not just the intellectualization of understanding what is right and understanding what's totally fundamentally wrong, but then also being able to physically act to combat it, right?
Mhm.
There's a process to getting there. And um and so it's like I want to acknowledge that I am late to the show, and um in practice, and I want to be better. um
I can respect that.
that's, you know, I don't want it to sound like an excuse. I want it to, I think that we, you know, from a, if you step out to even just the purely psychological, like, paradigm, right? As opposed to a personal one. And you think, okay, like, the human brain has to go through these like experiences. You can't, rarely just go, well, that's the right thing. Okay, boom, I'm putting away all of my history and moving into the next, right? It's like
Totally.
we have to work through the process of grieving this old view that we've held and saying like, oh God, like, even though I knew better, right, I still like allowed. And I am sick of myself, right? and and I need to move through that to be able to show up authentically. um
Totally. That makes a lot of sense to me.
and that sounds like excuse making in so many ways. It really is just like, not not our problem, white lady. Like, do your shit, like, figure it out, come on, like, step up. um but I do think it's a process, and I think that a lot of people are going to have to go through it, right? And it's not, we're not going to be able to just like snap our fingers and go, well, this is the right way to be. it's it is 100% the right way to be. And also there's a lot of unlearning. There's a lot of unlearning to do. Which is, if we've talked about, like, learning something's easy, relearning something is very hard at the brain level. Especially when you put deep emotional connections in the fray. um, so I, yeah, I sound like I'm making excuses. um,
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're just verbalizing the process that everybody has to go through to some extent who is not like a black person basically at this time, right? Or maybe who um I think that the process is like it is a really challenging thing to go through. It's a lot of self-reflection and it's hardly ever like pleasant or easy to acknowledge our implicit biases. But I don't think that it sounds like an excuse. I think what I have experienced from like other white people who are not in my life anymore, are people when they just say that it's not, there are people who just think that like this is not real, right? Like that white privilege doesn't exist. And
right.
they're so willing to bury their heads in the sand. But I guess to me I see the only way is being like through it. So I guess it doesn't sound like an excuse. I don't know. That's what I think.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, Grace.
Mm,
um, for whatever that's worth.
yeah.
If we turn this back to the yogic approach or theory. There's one more quote that, or two more quotes that I want to share and just like put into the theater here, so to speak. One is, in the process of making yoga more palatable to the West, it has come dangerously close to losing its soul. We can't afford to lose the gift of true yoga, which, to be clear, is multifaceted and owned by no single lineage, to its misappropriated commercial version. This is an opportunity for all of us practicing yoga to look deep into our hearts. How do we reclaim its essence? Who and what are we supporting with our money, devotion, and time? How can we bring the vibration of respect back into our own lives, our interactions with others, and our planet? Love, here's the second one. Love is not pitying or making excuses for people. That is enabling. Love holds people accountable. It has boundaries, and it says, that was out of line. You are better than that, and you can make this right. I think that both of those like stand as testimonials, right, to the idea that yes, yoga has taken a path in the West toward a commodity, right? But how can we, as individuals practicing or teachers making offerings, how can we make those offerings into community who like can't afford the commodity? Can we help return the essence, the idea, the theories of love and compassion and unity, a wholeness of the human experience? How can we use the tools we learn in this practice to empower others, to offer them their voice, to allow them to build their, to use these tools, to teach them these tools specifically to help guide their own introspection, right?
Yeah.
The question becomes like, okay, do we offer, as white teachers, do we become the like missionaries, the yoga missionaries into the Black neighborhoods, or do we teach our fellow white teachers to look more holistically? Like there's all of these pitfalls, right? That we don't want to just be the white savior either, right? It's like, how do we
Totally.
manage that in the yoga world?
Well, this is not an answer to that question, but like something else, another aspect of this that I think is really important to talk about in the context of yoga is like, I have seen a lot of yoga teachers employing spiritual bypassing right now, right? Or they think like, they try to take what is happening right now and spin some story about like, oh, we all just need to focus on having a higher vibration and things will be okay, or like everything's gonna be fine, this is all in the plan, and all of those things. And I feel like this glossing over of problems, pretending that you're not angry or pretending that you're not feeling these quote unquote negative emotions. I think that has been somewhat prevalent in the yoga communities I've been a part of, where they just want it to come. Yoga is presented in a way where it's a nice, neat little package, right? It's like you can get all the great things about yoga without all of the things that are hard. And I think that if we continue to encourage and let people teach yoga in this way, like even the more practical applications of like, how can we be more inclusive, will fall flat because it's not coming from a genuine place, right? Like when I was saying earlier, like, oh, just if a studio tried to like address this through like pandering or just because they want to have a better image, like that's just not gonna fly, because yoga is all about authenticity. And I think it's really easy to feel that and like smell the lack of disingenuous,
yeah.
this disingenuousness of a place. And gosh, I just think it's like, I think we have to like teach our teachers how to have those types of conversations. I
Yep.
actually remember there were like, it was like maybe 2 years ago when there were like a couple like mass school shootings that had happened like within this short amount of time. And I'm very willing to admit that I get really uncomfortable like talking about that kind of stuff with my students. Um, and I'm the type of person where I don't do like really long Dharma talks at the start of class. And like, I'm not like, I just had this thought and I just wanted to share. But I remember starting one of my classes by asking people, I was like, so I know things have been going on. What do you guys think? Like, do you think that teachers should address it? Or do you feel like you come here and this is like not what you want to hear? Like, I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so grateful to be able to like hear really genuine answers from my students, who most of them were like basically in the camp of like, oh, we like when you like, we would like it if, or we enjoy it when, enjoy is not the right word, we appreciate it when teachers take a moment to acknowledge what's happening in reality. And that was something that I really took with me, because I think that is something that's hard for me to talk about. I feel uncomfortable for sure.
Mm.
um so I guess I wish that I had been like taught how to do that. I mean, some people it's like really natural to do that, like performing the
Yeah.
performer gene thing. I don't know. I think that's huge though. um yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Um, I think I think that for most of us, escapism is a really attractive option, right?
Totally, I agree.
I am the first to acknowledge that fiction of all kinds, whether it's printed in the words or on the TV or in the movies, like as a person who has battled various versions of mania and depression my whole life, like escapism is so fucking comfortable. And it's so much easier to close yourself in a room and be um, with the fantasies, right? And I think that we subconsciously, as humans, many of us just veer that direction. And um, and I know that I've I've been employing it during the quarantine, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to actually like consider all of the negativity around me if I hunker down here and cook good food and work on my garden. And like it's this incredibly like isolating cocoon that you can go
Mhm.
into and pretend. Yoga can be that for some people, right?
Definitely
Yoga
agree.
can become your way to, instead of connect deeper, it's your escape route. It's it's like you said, you had this question, like, do you guys want to just come here and forget about what's happening on the other side of the door, or is this something we need to address? Like, I think it's a relevant question because we have to analyze whether or not our asana practice has become a way to become mindless instead of mindful, right?
Definitely.
And has our asana practice, are the people who come in and they're just like, I don't want you to talk to me, I want you to give me a flow, I don't want you to like over analyze, I want you to just like keep me moving so I can just like get in it. And it's like, my question to you is, by getting in it, are you really just disconnecting? Are you literally using that sense of flow and the music and the playlist to create a dome of separation from you and the world, from you and your deeper self? Because if you're so in the flow, we've talked about this in various ways, but if you're so in the flow that your mind goes blank, you're
You're not
hypnotized.
there.
There,
Yeah,
you're not there. You're now out of the yoga. Like if you're meditating and you go totally blank, that's not samadhi. That's something else. Like the blankness, the lack of anything is a whole different place than doing the work. than showing up
I agree.
into the space where the truth actually arises. Because I'm going to say this, I don't believe that the truth is a big blank space. Like,
I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I think um, that there's more to it than that. And so as humans in the human condition experiencing this manifest plane, we have to analyze our practice and ask ourselves as an individual, like, am I using this practice to go deeper or to go away? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So those moments where you're inclined to ask, and partly again based on your own skill set and what you're comfortable with, but I think I'm just going to paint this with a big brush and say, no, yoga class, that's what it's for, is to bring us into awareness and take us to discomfort, right?
Totally.
Because growing sucks. You know, we often talk about that difference between the discomfort of growth and the pain of injury. Like, they come very close to each other, right? They
They
don't
do.
exactly touch or overlap, but they look and feel a lot like each other at certain times. And so that discomfort, though, that friction point, is really where the work happens, the changes occur, the shifting to something newer unfolds, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and so I think that, like, this, I will say it's an uprising and not a movement, and I'll clarify that in just a sec, but this wellspring of emotion and action and rage and fear and sadness and grief and guilt, right,
Yeah.
comes up in a way that is like, it doesn't matter which side you're on, the quote unquote right or the quote unquote wrong, but it's hard for all of us. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, but that is what tells me we're doing something right, right? That we have
Totally.
come to the point of reckoning, right? And I think that this uprising of psycho emotional um, action and feeling has the potential to actually become a cohesive movement. But
Totally.
there's so many complaints out there that it's like, well, you don't have a point, you're not asking for a specific outcome, you're like blah 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 blah. I'm like, no 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 no, we haven't gotten there yet. We've been asking for specific things, and we collectively, the you know we collectively, those of us who want change, on behalf of the Black people as well as the Black people themselves and all other people of color, that uh, we have been asking for things for a very long time, and no one's listening, and no one has given us any, like, footholds. And so here now is the reckoning. This is the explosion of emotion that happens before we can actually coalesce into a pointed, focused movement. um
Totally.
like, there's so many interesting parallels to, like, the Revolutionary War and all of the steps that led up to that were rebellious acts of isolated groups against the crown and the authority, right? And those lessons are so easily overlooked, that, like, hey, yo, America was built on unrest. And at some point, we're going to have to acknowledge that we didn't get it right the first few times. Like, it's not right. We haven't gotten there yet. We haven't figured out the formula. And so there's certain things we got to scrap and certain things we got to, like, put into a new perspective and move forward.
Totally.
And so if we can look at even our yoga practice the same way and say, yeah, we have to let this come up and then use the tools that we have to actually, like, burn, to burn, right? Top us. We got to just fucking burn. And And that takes time. That takes time to burn through and move forward into the new expression. It's not easy.
No, not at all.
So again, I don't think we're answering any questions as much as hopefully not just talking into the void. Hopefully these conversations are not just happening in these kinds of forums, right? And that hopefully hopefully more and more of them happen. If this particular conversation sparks other conversation, I can only hope. I can only welcome that.
Definitely.
I'm curious to see how studios address the issues moving forward of our privilege, and not just that, but like more specifically the fact that, again, like these are buildings, these are spaces that have essentially been overrun and taken from people and displacing them. Like what makes that different than anything else in history? What makes it just that it's prettier to look at? Like fuck. I don't know. So, anything else to add?
I don't think so. At least not right now.
Yeah. My fear kicks in when I think about like the potential comments that could or would come up in this after this post from all sides. It's interesting, but it might be the one that I'm most also eager to see the comments that come through. Yeah. There, I acknowledge my limitations still, that I'm still working on
Yeah.
my role for sure, and my responsibility, without trying to aggrandize my experience, just going, no, it's just, I'm in it. So I'm saying this now, as uncomfortable as it might be, I welcome your comments.
Yay.
Elena's like, oh shit, really? Is that over? Okay.
It'll be good.
It will be. Hopefully, hopefully there's something there for others as well as myself to do better every day.
That's the goal.
For sure.
Mm.
Lean to your left.
Oh,
I love you.
I love you too.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I hope that there's something in here useful. I hope that this conversation keeps going. And I think that I shouldn't say I hope that. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's be devoted to that within the context of our individual lives as well as the context of our practice, and continue to understand that the time for escapism is done. And
well said.
And also acknowledge that is easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I think if we can acknowledge that, then we can and will actually take other steps. So thank you, Elena. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
And we appreciate all of you as well. We will be back next week with another post Thanks so much for listening. If you have any comments, you can go ahead and leave those. I will turn comments on at both YouTube and at the website. You can always contact us through the contact form at yogaengineer.com. If you want to make donations to the cause that we have here, please do. But I also understand that right now there might be other causes that trump our little yoga podcast. So we acknowledge that. Also, Elena's little mini workshops are coming up on the website. Finally, did it. We're doing it. We're making it happen. And she is still putting things lovely on her IGTV at Elena Shapeshifts. So make sure that you check out all of these different resources if what we talk about and what we offer seems relevant to your world at any point. I'm Richelle Ricard.
I'm Elena Chung.
We are the Yoga Engineers, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.